All right, so dialogue is another a thing, and creating unique voices for characters. This is crucial. I was once told, if you can't put your hand over the name of the character and know who it is, then you're not unique enough. But you did a very good job with unique voices, and I just want to do a little more reading because I think this is just such a great example. So this is in Father Michel's story. Time is not ours to relinquish. Men have been known to go to bed healthy, only to be dead by morning during this time of pestilence. Besides, everyone knows the story, Father Michel. None choose to speak it out loud, but in the hallways late at night, murmurs can be heard describing your exploits. Indeed, the Pope himself has heard the tale of how you took in a family of gypsies, little more than vermin wandering the countryside in a covered wagon, witches some say they were. That's dialogue. I mean, that's a voice. You know the guy who's saying that. Mm-hmm. And so where is that coming from? Where is that? How do you make sure, I guess, that each character is unique and has a unique voice and you're not shortchanging the reader?
I just try to put myself into the mind of another person. I think you have to be a little bit of a schizophrenic in many regards, because you put yourself in those situations and paying attention to conversations that are around you. Mm-hmm. And also finding out, how did people really speak then? That was actually the cardinal who was saying that. And I actually did the research and read some of the decrees that really went out during the time of pestilence, during the Black Death, where the church was basically saying things like, we're blaming the Jews for this, and we're cutting off ourselves off from society. They would quarantine themselves. There was all this kind of, because they didn't know what was going on and they were afraid, they started blaming, other people. Hello, like that doesn't happen today too. It's human nature. Oh my God, let's blame somebody else for our problems, type of a thing. So yeah, it was just a matter of really getting into the head of that person and imagining what it's like in that time period and how they would say those words. Mm-hmm. In this case, this person, the cardinal, is a man of authority. So he's trying to convince a hall of people, other clergy and wealthy landowners and lords and ladies, that this is the right path. So in a way, he was speaking a little bit like a politician would today.
Yep.
Yeah, Yeah.
So with some of your other characters, do you ever, or with all of your characters, are you ever pulling from people that you know? And everybody hates this. If you know an author, you've probably been in one of their books, is what a lot of people say. So are you pulling from people that you know in Oubliette?
Absolutely.
And how so?
My sister, I told her she needed to come today. She just had a baby a couple months ago, so she couldn't make it. But between my sister Daisy and I, we are both combinations of Veronica and Nikki. And I tell my sister, who is still in the process of reading the book, okay, you are not totally Nikki, because I don't want to offend her. But I took traits of our personality and how we communicate, and how, one of us will tend to be a little bit more conservative while the other one wants to goof off and have fun. So I definitely, and there's people I didn't like where, I made kind of a combination on their name, like a play on words on their name, and, kind of threw them in there as certain characters. They probably will never realize it, but, I have my moment. Yeah, that was you. That's what you get for pissing me off.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Where do you draw inspiration for the multitude of stories that you have going on?
From everywhere. Again, I think of this as historical fiction in many ways, because of the fact that you're dealing with time frames in the Reformation, again, during the Black Death, during the time of the pagans, during, the time of the French Revolution. So I did the research. And in some cases, it was just kind of like a story that was bubbling inside of me, and I was able to kind of take that concept and put it into Oubliette.
Is that sort of an exercise where you have a story you want to tell, but you don't necessarily have, like in screenwriting a lot of times, you will purposely take the same characters and put them in different storylines or in different jobs and see how that will work itself out? Did you do any of that, or did you already have the time frames, you knew exactly which stories you wanted to tell in which time frames, and through the research?
It was a little bit of both again. It really just kind of worked itself out. I'm thinking of the children's story and the fact that I had that nugget of how I wanted to start that storyline. Actually, the children's story originally was the start of the book, and I scrapped that, and it starts a little bit later. But just that concept of being chased and children and the vulnerability of children and wondering what's going on, why are they being chased, what are they doing in the woods? So there was a lot of that where I knew I needed it in there, and I just had to figure out where I was going to plug it in.
Okay. So there's a lot of different kinds of research, right? And then you first start with imagination. And then you can start, we're lucky to have, it used to be libraries and that kind of thing, but now we have the internet, so you're able to do a lot of that. And then there's actually physically touching things that are in your book. So talk about all of those three stages. And did you do some traveling? Did you, and what was necessary for you? See, because again, the descriptive writing is so powerful in this. It feels like you've been to all these places. I don't know whether you have or not, so.
Yeah, I went. So to talk about the stages, I didn't go anywhere before I started writing, and I realized I needed to go. And I am a toucher. I'm the person that goes to museums and I touch things when nobody's looking. I've been yelled at a couple of times. I touched the Titanic. I touched part of the exhibit at King Tut's tomb. I just, there's that connection there. It's a very visceral type of a thing. So after I wrote that first draft, I realized I needed to go to France. I needed to go to the Loire Valley where this book is set. And it just so happened that I had a friend who liked to go to Paris, and she was like, I'm going to Paris, you should come. You know how people say that, hey, you should come to Paris. And I was like, hey, okay, I'm gonna do that. And thanks to Kimberly, who is here in the audience right now, we jaunted off to Paris, and she showed me around, and she speaks very fluent French, which was good, because I don't know what I would have done without her. And I did. I went to Loire Valley, and I explored many of the castles. And being there in that setting, it was kind of just, it was a moment for me in many ways, because I was finding affirmation in a lot of things that I wrote. And it was almost like you would get those goosebump moments where it was like, I wrote that and it's real. How could, that's exactly the way I thought it would be. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of able to take those moments and really just salt and pepper them throughout the book and make them even more, dramatic and more real.
Right. And so did you feel almost a responsibility to make the writing sort of live up to the places once you visited them?
Yeah. Again, it's that authenticity and kind of paying homage to all these different places. There's a portion of the book that's set in the Paris Catacombs, and I went there, and we touched those skeletons, those walls. We experienced that. There's a sense of claustrophobia, a sense of awe when you're literally facing thousands of skeletons from the remains of people from hundreds of years ago. To have that moment and be there, I feel like, I hope that I'm doing a service to those people. There's a scene in the book where Veronica, when she's in the underground, and they're underneath a nightclub, and the nightclub is called the Paris Underground, hello, and it's got one of those secret passages. And stuff like that is real. There are actual secret ways to get into the catacombs. And they find this area that has this mural, and the mural has been added to from over the centuries. So you're seeing graffiti from all these different people. And she's, kind of making this comment about, wow, this is almost like this tapestry or a patchwork quilt where people are adding to it over the eons. And I just kind of thought that was beautiful, and it was something that I had to put into the book.
Right. Josette Camille's story, I want to go. This was one of my favorites in the book, for sure. And I loved all of them. But it's interesting because you're not really sure whether she's a victim or not, or whether she's sort of responsible for her own situation. And she's very sympathetic because of that. So is that because of her motivations, do you think? Or what makes her such a sympathetic character, even though she's not necessarily, a victim?
Right. I think it is because of her motivations. She's a soon-to-be mom, and I think a lot of us, especially women, can sympathize with that. And even if you're not, you can imagine yourself in a situation where you're about to give life, and it's supposed to be a happy time. And she unfortunately finds herself in a situation where there's a lot of chaos going on around her. And I don't want to give too much of it away, but it's really a look, it's one of the few storylines that's in the first person, and it's done very intentionally because you're living inside of her head, and you're kind of questioning along the way with her if she's mad or not, or what is real and what is not. And one of the scariest things I think we as human beings can face is our own sanity and what we perceive in the world. Madness has got to be the most frightening thing that can happen to a person. So if you're going to experience that kind of horror, then being able to get inside the head of that person is critical.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you brought that up, that was first person. Point of view is obviously super important when you're writing a story. So how did you decide who was going to have the point of view and where it was coming from and all of that with each of them?
So again, Josette Camille, first person, very intentional. In many ways, I pulled back on the omniscient sense of many of the characters. I feel it's more important to show than tell. And sometimes when you get into the head of a character, it's really easy to be like, well, so, I thought about this and I thought about that, and I think that this person is doing that. And you're just telling a story, you're not showing the story. So being able to let the drama and everything play out and let the reader fill that in and use their imagination and draw those, determinations, I think is a lot better experience for the reader.
Very good. So there's a danger with suspense thrillers and with genres all around in giving away too much information too fast and in how you unfold. And so were you actively sort of avoiding, because you had so many storylines and you had to show how they connected in a sense, but you can't give away too much and you don't want to frustrate the reader at the same time. How do you deal with all that? Were you thinking of that the whole time as you were writing? Was that something you had to go back and double check your work?
I absolutely double checked that. That was, in a lot of ways, that came in the down the road because of the fact that, again, after writing it and putting together the outline and really deciding where things needed to go, I needed to make sure that, this is revealed here. And it's because, it ties back into this storyline, and it feeds off of this. So it was very calculated, and I don't even know if it worked or not. I made sure that when I would go back and read the storylines myself, I would always do it with as much of a fresh perspective as possible, so that I would try to forget my own story so I could go in and read it anew.
Yeah. And so let's talk about, you just said something interesting. At what point do you feel comfortable enough to bring in beta readers to then read it and tell you this, I didn't get this, I don't, understand that, why did you do this? To ask those important questions. And also, how do you decide who's the right beta reader for you? Because a beta reader, if it's the wrong one, can really mess you up.
Well, my first two beta readers, again, were the ones who helped me so much realize that I needed to really go back and make a lot of changes. So that was Tara and Lynn, who I'm very grateful for their help. When Krishan Simpson, she was my first editor. She was the one who kind of went through the first time. And I needed to I felt somebody who I didn't really know, and I just found her on Facebook. We were Facebook friends, and she was posting, hey, not only am I a writer, but I'll edit your stuff too. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And she is amazing and did a phenomenal job. And then I took it on to another editor who did a fabulous job too, and she's in the audience here. It's Kimberly right there. And then Erica Heathman was my final editor to just kind of, hey, does everything work? Is there anything we missed?
Yeah,
and
that's actually a good lesson for young writers, is that you need multiple editors. Multiple editors are a blessing. It can feel expensive when you're paying them, but there are different kinds of editing. Let's talk about the different kinds of editing too. There's, for example, there's copy editing, there's line editing, there's, overarching story, character editing. There's a lot of different types of editors, and they're all very, very useful and will make your book stand out, I think. So talk about the different kinds of editing and that.
Sure. Krishan, I think, helped a lot with just basic copy editing and getting the structure and everything down. Kim was phenomenal with, she would ask me questions, and is this the way it's supposed to be? So she was looking more from the content perspective. And again, Erica was the person who right at the end was looking at anything standing out that we might have missed along the way and making sure the continuity was there.
Great.